Hi everyone, and welcome in this episode 2 of the Git series, the series in which we try to implement Git and understand how it works using Scala 3, Hexagonal Architecture, principles from DDD. So today it's episode 2. In the first episode, you might remember that um, did, we did some primitive blob hashing. So I explained what is a blob, that there are basically three types of objects. There are the blobs, the trees, and the commits. And in this first episode, we focused on the blog, and the goal was to try to create the hash, so the SHA-1 of the blob. There was a bit of a subtlety though, because as you can see here, the SHA-1 of the blob is actually the blob space, the content size, the 0 byte, and then the content itself. So we implemented that. I can show you quickly. It's a very simple implementation. I just created a main here, and I println the hash of blob, the string, the 0 byte, and the string. And I have implemented the SHA-1 here. So that's, as I say, a very simple implementation on purpose. Today we are going to change a bit this implementation, improve it a bit, because today we want to do, I'm going to show you again, we want to hash a file, a file that we specify from the file system. So as we can do with the command hash object. So last time we implemented the option with stdin, and today we want to implement the option where we don't specify stdin, but I think we just specify pass. I'm not sure yet. We're gonna see how it works with Git object, with the function itself. And to that, we are going to do a refactoring and an extension of the code that we wrote in episode 1, to support other options. As I said, for the moment, we only support like the file, sorry, the content of a string. Now we want to support also a file, and in the future, we'll want to also be able to write the object in the object database. So as I foresee that in the future we're going to have an architecture where we're going to have commands with different options. We are going to refactor this code, so to introduce the concept of command, and we're going to create a hash object command. And we are going to also introduce the basic skeleton for the hexagonal infrastructure by creating the domain and infrastructure package. The reason we are doing that is because so we want to always try to separate the domain and the infrastructure. The domain is the core of our software that we want to make sure that we have a good test coverage for it. And we want to allow the domain to be able to be modified without any constraints from the infrastructure. So in this episode and in the following episodes, we're going to come back on exactly what is the difference between domain and infrastructure and how they interact with each other. We are also going to add Zio, because as I said, we are going to try to hash a file. So that means that we're gonna need to have resource management, potentially streaming, retries, parallelism. Maybe not in that episode specifically, but in the future. I foresee that we're gonna have that. So we will obviously try to write a test, always in this TDD approach, write a test for hashing a file from the file system. And okay, so what about a large file? We can probably not have in memory a very large file, like you can imagine like a 1 gigs or 2 gigs file. It's probably going to be complicated to to fit in memory, and we'll try to implement the feature after that. So the first thing that we're going to do is the refactoring. So I'm going to open the code here again. Oops, I forgot to remove the first thing I did earlier. So as I showed you before, we have this main and we have this hash here. And if you notice here, we can already see kind of a difference between this file and this file. You can see that here the println is in the main and is not in the hash here. In the hash, we kind of concentrated in the hash file. We kind of concentrated the business logic, and here we kind of concentrated the infrastructure related logic. So here the console, I consider the console to be infrastructure, but you can imagine that we could call this function hash from HTTP server as well. And in that case, we wouldn't print in the console, but we would print in the response. So the first thing we're going to do is introduce a bit more explicitly this hexagonal architecture. And what I like to do is having a domain and infrastructure package. So I'm going to have git domain and git infrastructure. Okay, I have these two packages. Usually I put the main in the root in git in this folder usually. Eventually we're gonna have this logic, I think, move to infrastructure, but for the moment let's not worry too much about it. And I'm gonna move the hash into the domain because, as we say, it's domain related logic. Okay. We're gonna do the same for the test here. I'm gonna okay, so I can see that the main spec was moved as well. I'm just gonna check the package because I suspect that as this SCADA 3 is not going to be well moved. So here we're in the package git and hash is package git.domain. Gonna do the same here. Okay, so this was moved correctly. This was moved correctly as well. So if I go back, sorry, to hash here. So obviously here hash is not found, so I'm gonna import the git domain hash. Okay, we're gonna see if we still have, where's my terminal? If our tests are still running. So here we want to run the main spec. Okay, did it import? That's a bit suspicious. Oh yeah, because it's the same package. Sorry, I got confused by the red. So okay, good, perfect. So pretty happy about that. So, and if I try to run the application again, okay, so we can see that we have, if I open again the test, something pretty similar to what we want, so good. And now I'm just going to write a test quickly for this main. It's not. I'm going to try to see if we print the right thing to the console. So if we print that to the console, it's not best test for the moment. It's just a temporary test because, um, yeah, this is going to move eventually. But as we are going to refactor this hash a bit, I just want to make sure that we are still having the same result and not changing the behavior at all. So I'm gonna open main spec here. So in Scala we have that we can capture the console out. It's not an ideal test. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's gonna be good for this use case at least, I think. So what I can do now is actually call the main with this content, and I think we could say stream the toString should be, and the should be is, I'm gonna copy it from that. Okay, so now I'm going to run the main spec. Okay, so we have something different. I was actually thinking that we should have tried to make it fail first, because otherwise we are not sure that it's actually testing something, but here it seems to be testing something. And we can see that there is line return here that we don't have. So because of the println is going to add a line return. So I'm going to add the line return at the end here, and this should pass. Okay, and we can check that it's actually working. If we had something else here, we'll see that the test is failing. Okay, so we can see that the test is failing. So we have confidence that the test is actually testing something, and I'm going to rename the test. Should println the hash of the string parameter. Okay, so now I can open my hash again and refactor with confidence. So here I'm gonna also introduce the concept of use case, and I see the use case as like a complete feature, a full feature, if I may say. So for instance, you can imagine like different commands of Git, like commit, push, pull. All this can be considered, I think, as use cases. Instead of having a service kind of architecture, I think it's better to have an architecture where we express the use cases. I think as well that we are going to probably use one use case in the other. For instance, when we commit, we maybe use the hash object use case that we're going to create now. I'm not sure that's if it's a good pattern or not. We'll see how it goes with the as the project evolves. So now I am going to create an object. I'm always going to create object instead of class if I don't need any parameters, and I'm going to create the object hash objects use case. Okay, and I'm going to move those things in there. I'm going to rename the file. Okay, here DJ tells me that it's better to use lens and add a parenthesis. I'm going to do that. Let's see if my test is still pass. I expect it doesn't because the hash function is not available here anymore. So I need to do that. I'm going to import everything from domain. It's going to be easier. And let's try to run the test again. Okay, so we see that now that the hash test is failing. So hash test, hash spec. So it's going to be very similar here. Just going to prefix that and prefix that as well. Okay, and it's got imported.
Okay, let's see now if the test passes.
Perfect, our test passes. So here we have our skeleton of domain and infrastructure. I am actually going to move this hash object use case into a use case folder and created the model folder as well. No, sorry, I want package. And sorry, I main package, obviously. Model and package use case. I'm gonna put it in singular and move that into use case. Perfect. I have the use case in my domain. So one thing that I didn't mention about hexagonal infrastructure is that the domain should have no knowledge of the infrastructure. We'll see that in the future, but all the logic here should be pure without any infrastructure knowledge. Before I dive into that, I'm just going to rename this as well to have something consistent. And move it to use case, leave it in the same route, yes. So we have something nice here, just going to run the test again to see. Okay, so let's see our main, our readme, sorry, what's the next step to do? Refactoring and extension of the code to support input option. So we set up the domain and infrastructure package. We wrote a test for main, and I'm going now to introduce the hash object command. And in this use case, and I'm going to open the main actually here. I'm going to create a case class, hash object, command. So first, what's command? A command is a user intent. So I don't know. I want to buy a car. I want to rent a house. I want to hash this object. So that's what we call commands. Having a command like that allows me to use the type system a bit more extensively and to express more explicitly what is the user intent. So I like to use this command, even though we are not doing command sourcing or CQRS here. We are just I'm just using these patterns to have a clear code. So here, what I'm going to do is I have this hash command, hash object command, and for the moment we are going to give one parameter which is going to correspond to this string. So I'm going to call that string to hash, string to hash, which is going to be a string, and I'm going to create a function def on all command, and it's going to take the hash object command. Okay, And for the moment, we're going to return a string. Maybe we're going to change that in the future, but not a big deal for the moment. And what we're going to do is just call hash with hash object command. Okay, hash object command dot string to hash. String to hash. Thank you. So here we are no longer using hash object use case. Actually, we're going to put that in private for the moment. Private, because we don't want people to use that outside of that. Maybe we'll put them in package protected actually later on, but to be able to use them in the tests. So here we are going to call the function under comment and hash object command. Okay, let's run the test to see. Use case. We import everything from use case, and we should have everything imported. My test is failing because this cannot be accessed from outside. The SHA one is a detail of implementation, so I'm not going to keep it. What I want is the test of the hash function, and I'm just going to use the under comment here and hash object command, and I like to explicitly specify those parameters. Hash. I'm going to put that bigger. Okay. Should be okay. So let's see now. Actually, I'm gonna run all the tests, not only this one. Subject command needs to be imported as well. IntelliJ is a bit falling behind here, so perfect. Our tests are passing, so that's great. I'm going to rename that by that. Okay. So I'm pretty happy about that. So we can see that our code start to have some much more shape that we have before. Even though we have the same feature, we didn't change the feature, but we know that we're going to want to add more features, and having this structure is going to allow us to help us to add more features easier. So I'm pretty happy. The tests are passing. I'm going to commit that. So I'm going to create a new branch, episode 2. Okay. And I'm going to add everything, sorry. Just checking that there is no. And we're going to call that refactor and refactor to hexagonal. Architecture and introduce command and use concept. Okay, we can push that. Perfect. Okay, first step done. Okay, so I was doing this add Zio task here, but I was seeing the time flying. So what I'm going to do is stop the episode here and do the rest later on. So this episode was about refactoring to use hexagonal architecture and introduce concepts like command and use case. I hope I was able to explain a bit the reasons behind these choices. And thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.